Hello and welcome to Season 6, Episode 3 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And we are, of course, reading James Hitchcock's History of the Catholic Church, this time getting into Chapter 2, The Seeds of Christians, talking about some of the early popes, sort of early church structures. We sort of move on from where we left off last week with the beginnings in Jerusalem. I enjoyed this chapter. I thought it was good, very well written, very sort of concise, but had a lot of interesting information that I didn't know about the early church. So those are my immediate thoughts. I guess you have no thoughts. It's just a completely awkward pause there. You have nothing to add to that.
The book has the same format throughout the whole thing, which is almost like hyper sections, like little tiny, like each paragraph has a title on the margins, a little blurb. So it's a different kind of reading, and I was expecting more of a. Of course, I didn't even look at the book before we got it, because that's what we do. But I was expecting more of like a narrative, like this was the first pope, this is the second pope, that kind of stuff, and this is what happened. But of course, at the beginning, maybe we'll get more of that as it goes forward. But a lot of subsections about, the different philosophical schools of thought, that type of thing. Before I get too much into it, I sound, I think, a little stopped up because I believe I have a sinus infection.
Yeah, you sound awful.
So I thought, well, I'm going to see my doctor because I'm going to be flying to Washington, D.C. to see a certain person.
That would be me.
I thought I need to see my doctor before I go on this flight because, if you have a sinus infection, that's bad news with pressurization and stuff. But I saw that the Mercy, which is a local hospital chain here in the St. Louis, in this region, and they have like a online Mercy thing. So it's kind of a neat deal. You answer these questions and put in your symptoms and your medical history, and it takes a long time to do it. But then you just pay $20. And they give you a diagnosis, only if they give you some sort of diagnosis and help. So, all right, I'll put 20. So they get your credit card information first.
Yes.
And then they send that off to a nurse practitioner or whoever. And of course, they had a series of questions because it was like cold related, a sinus infection. Series of questions about, have you been vaccinated? And all the benefits of vaccination. And it was all the lies. I mean, nobody even thinks any of the vaccination stuff is true anymore, I didn't think. But in any event. So then they charged the $20 and they said, you got a sinus infection. Take these over-the-counter medications. I'm like, damn it, I could have done that myself. I was kind of hoping for an antibiotic or something, but it was diagnosed as a viral sinus infection, which they never really have a treatment for. So they give you this placebo, over-the-counter expensive placebo, and which was always my theory that I want to mass market an over-the-counter.
You've mentioned this before. I'm aware of this plan, but feel free to fill in our audience. No, you absolutely 100% have talked about this at least two other times in the podcast. Yes.
Never mind.
You've been doing this. No, you can tell the story again. I'm sure, not everybody who's listening right now has listened to all, 150 episodes that we have or something.
Well, it's I want to. It'll be like a pill, but it'll be a sugar pill, and I'll just call it placebo. And I can put on there that placebo has been found to reduce pain and suffering and cure illness.
There you go.
Because in controlled studies, a placebo has that psychological effect.
That's true. There you go.
But I think I'd still get sued by somebody or another.
Probably. Should we get into the actual book and talk about what we're supposed to be talking about?
Yeah, okay. The seed of Christians. Well, it starts out with a good point, which is Jesus's timing was pretty good. I mean, in the sense that, not in the sense that he got crucified and stuff, but in the sense that it was during the Roman Empire. It was they were in the Roman Empire. And because the empire was there, his followers were able to travel relatively in relative peace and security throughout the Roman Empire. And that whole part of the world because there's roads and there's there's regular boat and foot travel and all that stuff. And even though that the empire itself was discriminatory, put it lightly, against the early Christians, because there was an empire, they were able to actually fulfill the mission of their apostolic mission. So I thought that was kind of an interesting, backstory about it. But then there's a discussion of Gnosticism, and I don't know. I was reading something else about Gnosticism, and I can't remember what it was. Maybe it was it might have been a Hawley's book. No, maybe not. Maybe not. But anyway, the Gnosticism, which is kind of an interesting philosophy that was, I guess, evidently popular with some of the followers at the time, because the author says it was a strong force that found the world so repugnant that yearned for release. So it's almost, and I guess it kind of expounds on that, where their belief was essentially it's kind of like a two worlds. Like there's the God, the creator, the good God and the bad God. I guess God and Satan. And then there's always been this question of, how could there be evil in a world that is created by a perfect being? How could there be bad things coming from a good creator? And of course, we even talked about that with Tolkien. How did he go with his creation myth theory and all that? By the way, they're that now that they've ruined Lord of the Rings,
yes,
they're going to take on Narnia.
Yeah, I saw. Is it Netflix?
Netflix is going to. I'm sure it's going to be queer. And I just saw a little blurb. It might have been taken out of context, but I guess they're coming out with a Snow White movie.
Oh yeah, I did see this.
And with what's her face, the actress from Israel, Gal Gadot. But I guess she's the the evil witch or whatever, the evil person that puts a spell on Snow White, right? Isn't the story was there was a vain person that was threatened by the beauty of Snow White and then put a potion or whatever, had her eat an apple, maybe.
Yes, poisoned apple, yeah.
Allusion to maybe Adam and Eve story. But anyway, and then there's this anyway, so there's an interview with a red carpet with Gal Gadot and this little person who is evidently the Snow White character, who does not appear to be as Snow White as me. But that'd be, okay, I guess we're not going to follow that anyway. But then I'm looking at them side by side while they're saying this nonsense. They're both saying the nonsense that, well, it's not the Snow White of 1937, like when people actually were creative and talented,
of course,
writers and actors.
Yes.
But instead, it's going to be like a story of empowerment and how Snow White can do things without the assistance of a prince. Blah, 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 blah. So of course they're going to ruin it because nobody wants to see that. But I'm sitting there thinking, I was initially thinking that Gal Gadot was going to be the Snow White character. She's obviously better looking than the other girl. Sure. I mean, just patently, not even close. And so I'm wondering how they're going to work that in there. Is Gal Gadot going to be jealous of this little ugly troll woman, or? I don't know how that's going to work. So I might see it just to see how they explain that. But anyway,
there you go. Well, I don't know if you noticed, touching on that, yes. of the 7 dwarves, only one is an actual dwarf. All of the others are just regular people that they sort of like pulled from somewhere. Like it's really ridiculous to see, because it's like, oh, here's the cast of the 7 dwarves, and there's one dwarf that they have standing in front, and then like 6, average height people. So it's really weird that they went with that choice. It seems weirder that they picked one person to be an actual dwarf and then said, okay, the other 6 are just like average height people. That makes it seem so weird. Either go all or none, I would feel like.
Yes. Because why do you have any dwarves?
Yeah.
I thought when you started, it was going to be an argument over whether they're dwarves or midgets, which I'm not sure you're supposed to use the term midget.
No, apparently not.
But I think you're supposed to say little people for both. I don't know. It's hard for me to keep up. I'm over 50.
Well, in the original Snow White, it was Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs with an F, because that was before Tolkien popularized the spelling of dwarves with a V. Before him, it's dwarfs, and he changed it to dwarves because he liked that better, essentially. But really, the old English word would be dwero, the dweros, but then he changed that to dwarves. That's a little interesting side fact.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Just crashing and burning, just balls of fire. I bet you that movie never even gets released. We're getting to the point where it's like they don't even want it. They don't even want the embarrassment of losing money. They'll just lose the money.
Yeah,
but I don't know. Maybe they will. On a happier note, the Washington Post lost $100 million last fiscal year.
Wow,
$100 million. That's
a lot of money.
Net loss.
I can go to their headquarters and ask them about it.
Jeff Bezos doesn't care. He's a multi-billionaire.
Yes, that's true. Yes, but back to Gnosticism. I want to highlight that point that you made about the dualism. To sort of flesh that out. The idea that there's two gods, one of the material world and one of the spiritual world. I don't know if you really mentioned that specifically, but I think that's like the main point there is that, what you were saying with, how is there evil in this world, is that the Gnostics would believe, well, God doesn't necessarily rule this world. This world sucks because it's ruled by, sort of an evil, a darker God, Satan in this case. And so then they kind of go in, and he elaborates a little bit on that. But the idea that, we should be doing everything in our power to sort of escape this world and move on to the next in a way.
Yeah, and you see some of that kind of attitude later on in the chapter. They're talking about the dangers of praising martyrs.
Yeah,
because you encourage something, you get more of it. But anyway, so that was thank you for highlighting that. I was going to get to that after 10 more different segues.
Yes, I figured
responsive things. Well, then there's a brief reference to the Gnostic Gospels, which there's an explanation that Gnosticism requires a rejection of the Old Testament because they're claiming that that creation theory is not correct. So there's some, if you're a Gnostic of that era, you don't believe in any of those Gospels. But then there's a discussion about I don't know if it's here, if I'm moving ahead too far, but like the false Gospels of Judith, Thomas, and I think there's one that's purportedly from like Mary Magdalene or something.
Yeah, there's another one that's allegedly written by Philip, and then like assorted stories about Mary Magdalene that fit in like this Gnostic tradition.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the Gnosticism. I'm wondering why there were so many people following it or writing about it or whatever. I mean, because as the author talks about it, it was paradoxical that it urged rejection of the flesh in order to enter the realm of the spirit. But the renunciation of sexual relations was thought to be possible only for the elite, leaving the masses to live lives of unredeemed sensuality. Which sounds like a lot of people would rather have that. I don't know.
Yeah, no kidding.
Especially in today's day and age. They only, this is a theme that I think we should probably pick up on contemporary culture. A lot of this the early church, the seed of Christians in this chapter are talking about how they're struggling with the Roman authorities because they're just so foreign, within their own society. And one of them is they won't, that a lot of the martyrs just refuse to give any alms or any sort of reference to, or I don't know how I'm trying to articulate something.
Deference to the authority of like the pagan gods.
Yeah, to acknowledge their existence, and they refuse to do so. And the government, obviously, these are not revolutionary people because they're passive. They're still paying their taxes, just like Jesus said, given to Caesar what is Caesar's, and they're not warlike, and they're not committing crimes, but they're screwing up all the mojo, because like that seemed like the Roman religions were really with these gods were like they have a lot of superstitions, and if they perform these ceremonies, they expect to have the gods reward them, but then they got these crazy Christians doing the sign of the cross during a pagan ceremony and praying to some other deity that doesn't belong to this group, and then then the storms come and ruin their crops or whatever, and then that they have to come to the conclusion based upon their philosophy that the Christians were at fault for it. So it's kind of interesting. It's wild from that point of view, and then the fact that that the liturgy, which we're going to get to a little bit, is talking about a sacrifice, And then, when they're going to be, they're at risk of being martyrs. Well, being a martyr is a gateway to heaven, guaranteed heaven. And so then they're sentencing these people, these early Christians, to horrible tortures, eaten alive in the Colosseum and all that. But yet they go forward with it and don't try to fight, because they're actually welcoming it, which must have been really powerful at the time. I mean, it would be powerful now. I mean, it's very rare for people to just step forward and take, without complaint, unfair punishment. That's super rare. But anyway, so I'm kind of got ahead of myself, because we're still talking about the Gnostics and all that. I don't know if you want to talk too much more about the Gnostics and the Marcionites, these different factions, as the early Christians are trying to work out these issues about, whether the truths of Christianity, like who is it, Irenaeus, emphasize the truths of Christianity are accessible to all, and it's not just for these select few, like it seems like Gnostics wanted to. Saint Irenaeus.
I wanted to point him out specifically because I think it's worth mentioning. I think it's Irenaeus.
There you
he
go.
died in
I pronounced it right.
Roughly. He died apparently around 195. The Bishop of Lyon in Gaul, which is now France, in his treatise on heresies, which is one of the earliest Western theological works of any kind. And I had never heard of this before, but I think it's worth pointing that out. St. Irenaeus, one of the earliest, theological writings. And of course, it's like essentially an attack on a heresy, that he sees. And, you only feel the need. And I think he kind of, elaborates on this a little bit later. But a lot of these,
what was his name?
Irenaeus. That's great. That's great, Dad. Thank you for that. But what I was saying was, and I think he points this out a little bit later, but a lot of, the foundational theological writings were only ever written to refute, a bad teaching. Nothing was, you only set things in stone once you realized, the negatives of a certain point of view, or how wrong a certain point of view is, and you have to refute it. And that's when it comes to the realization, okay, this is what is, true. This is what is, the correct path to take. And it's not just made up from nothing. It's made usually in to counteract another wrong theological point.
Yeah. And it kind of makes sense. Like if you're going to build a house, and there's a traditional way to do it, but then, somebody starts doing it all wrong. And you're like, whoa, that the house is going to collapse. And before it catches on, you got to tell everybody and put it down in writing. Yeah. Hey, don't, you got to put some weight in your walls, or else your roof is going to cave in or something. So it makes sense logically that you're not going to necessarily just write everything down at first until it's challenged, and then you have to confirm in writing and letters to other people, or some sort of teaching to the flock in writing. Hey, this is not right, but this is right. And so. That's a good point. Like the early church, it's usually just like this one. His is just treatise on heresies, which probably pretty good reading, I guess.
Probably. I know how much you like to read about heresies.
That's true. So there's a discussion on the Gnostics, Marcionites. Am I pronouncing that right? I don't know.
I believe so.
That's where I was talking about. They rejected the entire Old Testament because their emphatic denial that the creator of the Old Testament is the God of the New Testament. So they're denying really the Jewish basis for Christianity, which is pretty wild that early on. Because so many, there are a lot of these people in the early, first 100 years. They all could still consider themselves Jews, so they're still going to the synagogue and they're doing those prayers. And then they have their own separate Christian gathering because they don't see, it's not really inconsistent. It's just another day of prayer. So any thoughts about that, or you want to move on?
No, I think that's a good point. I think we move on to creation and the soul and things like that.
Yeah. So Saint Clement of Alexandria, didn't we study him in our history of philosophy book? I
think so. Very, very briefly. I mean, that's been like 2 years ago at this point, but I think we did mention him.
Yeah, Saint Clement, and then he it was the first one to really put forth the philosophical belief that God created the universe from nothing. But it wasn't some sort of from God or from something else. it just came from nothing. That really is Catholic teaching. It came from, that it was created by God, but it isn't God, and so it's not divine. The earthly world is not a divine creation or part of God like the other myths. For other religions, like the God was a turtle or whatever.
It's not like the physical body of God. That's a big thing. Is when you're some like monster slain and that's shaped into the world or something like that. But no, it's created out of nothing, and of course that refutes like the chief premise of Gnosticism, which is that there are two separate worlds essentially, and one God did not make everything.
Right. Well, the throughout philosophy, I mean, there's a whole philosophy of the soul or of the mind, because I mean, maybe the soul is the mind, but maybe it's not. But how does the soul interact with the body? That's nobody. I don't think anybody's really has a very good explanation for how that even happens. But in any event, moving on to the soul. The belief that the soul pre-exists its incarnation in the body was widespread in the ancient world. So like the soul existed before the body. And the Gnostics certainly believe that. And that of course has some effect on human sinfulness, whether or not the soul can be morally bound by the sins in the human body, or if the soul was more pristine or pure, or if it existed before the body did. Now, from Paul's letters, Irenaeus,
Irenaeus, probably.
Developed a contrasting theory of redemption, which is the theory that Adam was created free but fell into Satan's clutches, a bondage inherited by all, and then Jesus Christ set everybody free, which is an overarching theme in Josh Hawley's book.
Oh, really?
It's a pretty good book. Yeah.
I mean, that's the doctrine of original sin. So maybe if the Gnostics had one out on that one, like the entire Christian theology would have been 100% different, because so much of Christian theology is based on that concept of the original sin, which we now know to be correct, which is interesting to think about.
Yeah, and I don't know if I go with it 100%. I'm still wrestling with that one, but that's for a different episode. We'll get to. I'm sure we'll come back.
I'm sure.
And there's a discussion of Saint Ambrose of Milan, who I think also made an appearance in our history of Western philosophy books.
So make sure you go back and listen to those episodes before you listen to this, so you can really understand what we're talking about here, because I guarantee we've forgotten everything about St. Ambrose of Milan.
Well, he formulated the accepted Orthodox teaching that the soul is immortal by nature, but God also brings about the resurrection of the body. Which, I'm not sure about that theory either. I guess the body will be resurrected. I mean, I know that's Catholic teaching, but it seems like, in what world are we going to live in? I don't know.
The new heaven and the new earth, I guess.
I guess so. I wonder if they'll have carpet.
That is such a weird thing to say. Why carpet specific? What does that mean? You wonder if they'll have carpet?
Well, will all these little minutia of life experience and human creation be there in that recreated world, the heaven and earth, and all the stuff? Is it going to have the stuff? If it's not going to have the stuff, what do we need the body for? Like, when you're tired and you lay down on a nice plush carpet or rug, are you going to be able to feel that? Well, not if there's no carpet.
That's true. I think that's such a weird thing to ask, but I think I'm gonna take a line from Tolkien here and his ideas on creation, and I'm gonna say probably not. I don't think there would be human-made things in the new Earth, because human-made stuff is sort of an abstraction of reality. Going back to his idea about a fictional castle is less real than like a physical robot making factory. So the idea that, I think that the farther along we get into human creation, the less it is God's creation, more a sub-creation of humans. So if God was to make, the earth new and perfect, I guess we probably wouldn't have carpet. Because I think it would be sort of a return back to the Garden of Eden, right? Where before they had shame and made clothes.
We'd be naked.
Probably.
Naked. All right, moving along. We talked about the soul a little bit, the world of spirits, and the belief of magic. And I kind of touched on it earlier, but like the gods and the superstitions. But magic, the belief of magic, and a lot of it being kind of an evil force in the world with spirits, was widespread. I mean, it was worldwide. Everybody believed there was magic, including the Jews. As far as demons and that sort of thing. And Gnosticism, which seems to have been a force in these early Christian battles or arguments, accounted for evil by teaching that demons rule the material universe, which we touched upon. I think you mentioned it earlier. And and demons had to be fought against continually and could be vanquished only through divine power. And so belief in magic was shared by the Christians, according to the author, I'm quoting here, who usually treated not as fraudulent or delusory, but as a genuine and dangerous manifestation of evil power. And that Jesus himself was removed demons from people during his lifetime and all that. So all these discussions occurring, trying to figure out the Christian, really the Catholic, because that's all it was, philosophy with regard to all these things is. But it seems like it was either the regular Catholics and the Gnostics.
Yeah.
Would have been any fistfights. All it would be was them telling each other, turn the other cheek. I'll turn the other cheek. No, I will. The least violent fight ever.
Oh, there you go.
So then he mentions there's a victory of orthodoxy. And he mentions that Gnosticism didn't fade away as a result of the work of, how do you say his name? Irenaeus and others. The battle went on for several centuries. I think it might have been resolved by like maybe the 4th century. But that's just me talking. I don't think that's in the book. But the church's eventual victory had a profound effect, not only on the followers, but also on Western world and Christian and the Near East world. And this is an important point. I highlighted this where I'm on page 39. Western culture. This is a quote. Western culture would have lost that sense of importance of human activity and history that distinguish it from the fatalism that at times affected much of the East, because that belief of redemption and that hope, and not the fatalism, so you're not just, whatever the gods say is going to happen, but that God valued us and we're going to go to a better place afterwards. And we need to serve God and serve each other and love your neighbor and all that stuff.
I think it also sort of applies to the more like, I guess, quote unquote, like introspective religions, like, Buddhism, for example, that sort of, affirms that, there's so much evil in the world. The only thing, the best approach to deal with that evil is just sort of like seclude yourself away from the world and like focus on yourself and meditate on yourself and things like that. And so it's sort of that sort of fatalism where it's like, okay, well, there's not much that I can do against the evil in the world. I just need to meditate and be on my own and away from the rest of all this evil, which I don't think is the proper approach.
Right. But that philosophy, the underpinning of philosophy, really makes a society function well. I mean, just as a practical matter, if you have people that are hopeful in the future and believe that all individuals have worth, it makes for a much better society than the fatalistic, might makes right type philosophy. It just makes for a more peaceful and productive society, in my opinion. So it's just kind of a whether it's divine or not, it certainly is practical. So then there's a discussion, somewhat lengthy discussion throughout this chapter about the hierarchy and the rules that you can see that it starts becoming a religion as opposed to just a belief. And quote the author again, one of the church's legacies from the Romans was precisely her sense of order and discipline, including her sense of law. And of course, the Catholic Church has canon law, which is still in existence and is published. So, as far as who has the authority to do what and say what and disciplining people either as members of the church or as priests, deacons, and bishops, all that's put down in canon law. and they have cases, just like any other case law book. They have decisions that were made by tribunals or whatever you want to say, or bishops or groups of bishops. And I think that's in some sense the strength of the Catholic Church, also a weakness because it makes you unwieldy and maybe sometimes looking at the rules as opposed to the morality or the philosophy behind it. But it is, I think, one of the great strengths of the Catholic Church because the history of lawmaking and the rule following and the liturgy kind of plays into that too, which I get to.
That's exactly what we were mentioning earlier with like all the chief theological doctrines. As well, you to sort of figure out what the structure is, you're going to have someone challenge it at first. And sort of the cases that you mentioned are repudiations of bad ideas or bad structures, bad rules for the church. And it's only really through those coming up that you ever think to sort of counteract them. I think it's, you can't really predict, the next bad theology, if that makes sense, or the next bad rule, and you have to work against it when it does come up.
Yeah. And the administration of a religion is problematic because you have not only what's the right thing or what's the wrong thing, but you also are trying to figure out the best thing for everybody's soul involved. And you can see that even in modern canon law where the diminished capacity defense excuse me is much more lenient than the current, certainly Missouri state law, as far as like voluntary intoxication, because they're more concerned about the morality issue as opposed to the responsibility, culpability, if that makes sense. Are you culpable? They're more concerned about long-term, soul of the offender. And I think that's a misplaced emphasis for the administration of the church. It's one thing to kick them out of the church. It's another thing to condemn them to hell.
I think to kind of diss on the Protestants a little bit about the point on canon law and things like that. I feel like with a lot of the Protestant faiths, the solution to like, differing views on theology or rules or whatever is just to split off and, create a new church. I'm angry with the leaders of this church, time to start my own. Whereas I think Catholics are much more concerned with finding out, okay, what is really true for everybody within the faith, and so that we can, make sure that we are leading everybody in the right direction instead of making people choose between, okay, well, this church in this town says this, and then this church in this town says this other thing. Which one do I believe more, or do I agree with different parts of their theology and not some? So I think, that's one of the benefits of the Catholic Church and its structure in that capacity.
Yeah, it's a strength and weakness because the strength is you're either in the club or you're not. You're either Catholic or you're not, period. But the weakness of that is you lose some people because they're like, well, I don't want to do that. But I was talking to Eli about that, your youngest brother Eli, about churches. I don't know, it popped in my head, and we've been doing this lately. We're running errands and I'll have them Google stuff for me. And I said, what is the state with the most per capita churches in the nation? And it looked like it's Mississippi.
Interesting.
Missouri,
expect that.
Missouri's pretty high, but what got me thinking of it was driving past the Second Baptist Church, because my point, and this is kind of a joke, but my point is that there's always at least two Baptist churches in any town of any size, because you had the First Baptist Church, and then you had the people that got mad at one of the pastors of the First Baptist Church, and they split off and they became the Second Baptist Church. And then there's another Baptist church, and there's like in our town, like the Twin Cities here, I don't know how many Baptist churches there are. There were like 10, I think.
Wow.
And I think a couple of them are now non-denominational, which is, come on, join a denomination.
Well, again, that's another benefit of the Catholic Church. If we'd had all of the splintering, we'd see much more of the slip into non-denominational, because it's like, well, we'll just accept everybody if we can't decide on what is the things that are true.
There's definitely a watering down of your theology if you don't have a take it or leave it attitude for some of them. And I think right now, and of course, the Catholic Church is struggling with attendance and with people staying in, and people having families and raising them in the church, and that's why we're seeing a lot of consolidation in the St. Louis area, because of course it's hard to get people to become priests. but like the Anglicans, what's the point of even having that religion anymore? I mean, you can be a rainbow flag waving weirdo in any religion. You know what? Why do you have to be an Anglican?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's all they are now. Is like these leftist rainbow flag wearing. The Anglican lobby is going to be after me on that one, but you see,
We've lost all of our Anglican fans. Such a shame.
They're right off England. Just lost all our listeners from the British Isles.
Mm-hmm.
Any event, that's a good discussion on that.
So hold on, I think you just angered the Irish there too. We did not alienate all of the British Isles because the Irish are still Catholic. We don't want to lump them into the Anglicans. They'd be very upset with us if we did that.
The Irish aren't part of the British Isles, are they?
Yeah, they are. The British Isles is all of the islands. So Ireland, Great Britain, the island itself, the Isle of Man. I think that's the little one in the middle.
Yeah,
that's all the British Isles.
No, Ireland's Catholic.
That's what I'm saying. That they would be very upset with you lumping in with the British Isles and lumping them in as Anglican.
Yeah, well, the Irish Catholics, they're like now pro-abortion. Well, they legalized it years ago.
You better, inspect your car tomorrow morning when you leave for work. Saying all these mean things about the Irish.
I don't think they're a force in Jefferson County, Missouri anymore.
Probably not.
There won't be any car bombings. One of my comments in Missouri.
I hope not.
All right. So then let's talk about what is the truth. We're talking about, hey, the Catholic Church believes in something. So as they were forming these beliefs and this, the structure, the church ended up declaring that the Gnostics' own writings to be apocryphal, hidden, and unreliable. Basically, said these are not part of the scriptures. They're just something somebody wrote. So that's not part of the Bible. Pound saying Gnostics. But they certainly created like creeds and liturgy, and of course there's a hierarchy which we talked about. Pope Saint Clement I wrote a letter of rebuke to the Christians of Corinth in Greece, wherein for the first time he spoke of the laity, the people of God, and exhorted them to obey their clergy. So do what you're told to a certain extent. And it defends the hierarchy, the rule by priests, and that was based on the order of Israel, which is now transferred to the church, capital C Church. And his letter was publicly read at Corinth as the voice of authority those matters. So that's somebody for this church to continue, somebody had to do it. So Clement laid down the law. Hey, you got to start. You got to obey the clergy. And it's not just a democracy. We're not going to vote on theology. It's going to come. It's going to be agreed on, and that's it. A few years later, Saint Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, was arrested and sent to Rome for trial, presumably because he was a Roman citizen. But on his way there, he sent letters to 7 local churches, which he expected to pass on his way to Rome to be brought there on trial. And that became the basis of some of the same teachings of the early church as far as the management of it. And he stressed the crucial importance of both the Eucharist and the office of the bishop, around whom the faithful must gather, and without whom there could be no legitimate church.
I think it's interesting that's brought up so early on, because I think if you were going to say what are the 2 defining features of Catholicism as opposed to all the other Christian faiths, is one, the Eucharist. We do believe that Jesus is 100% present in that sacrament, and we have a church hierarchy. And these are the 2 things that he stressed. What is this? Is this at 107 AD?
Correct.
He died around 107 AD. So this is 100 years after the death of Jesus, and we've already laid down, this is the fundamental principles of the church. This is the fundamental principles of this religion, according to Saint.
Right.
Saint
well, it'd be less than 100 years, because I don't know what.
That's true. Yeah, it'd have been like 33, 34, I think is, roughly the date that they give for the death of Jesus. So, less than 100 years after his death, we've set up, the 2 fundamental things within the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I was surprised by the early, I'm not a real student of this era. So I was surprised by those low numbers, because that is something that was published at a certain time and by a person who lived at a certain time. And that's early on. That's not 500 years later. He's just spewing BS that he doesn't really know. That's somebody that certainly knew somebody that lived in that era. What I'm saying? I mean, depending on how old he was and how long people lived, but he would have known people who knew Jesus. I mean, it's not that far removed. And then the early on, again, the four signs of the church, how it was identified. One, holy Catholic Apostolic Church. I mean, we still say that stuff today.
Mm-hmm.
The continuity of the fundamental philosophy is pretty striking when you're reading about these early thinkers and administrators of the church, when they're talking about the importance of this theory of apostolic succession, mm-hmm. where you couldn't just form a new church out of whole cloth. You couldn't just have people in a village say, okay, we're Catholic too. Well, no, you're going to be under a bishop. Mm-hmm. That bishop's going to be chosen by a bishop, by somebody who's already in it. And then there's I don't know if we're in here, but I think it's a little bit later, they talk about how people could join the Catholic Church, and it was quite a long process. I mean, it was like approximately 3 years. Of course, part of that was because they were getting hunted down and killed, and they didn't want spies and turncoats, which makes sense. And then like the catechumens is what they're called. It's still called that today, which is reassuring that we're still using the same term, so you feel like that has a little bit more strength and power that you're still doing those. And there has to be a sponsor from the church to verify the person is of reputable and really is interested in the church, which we still do today.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a couple points I want to make there. Going off what you said about how all of these principles are here from the beginning. Of course, I'm no expert in this era, is same as you. But the argument that I hear from a lot of people is like, well, the early church was so disorganized. Catholicism didn't really start until 400 something AD at this council, when this guy really proclaimed himself to be blah 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 blah, and from there on. But I think it's pretty clear just from reading this one book, all of the elements were present here. They might not have been 100% outlined, as they were very, very strictly, but that they are agreed upon with authority from all of these early fathers. And that's what became the rest of the church in that regard. And then again, with the apostolic succession, your point about you can't just start a new church from nothing, new religion from nothing. I think it's a great point to make, because this is the time of Roman polytheism, where essentially every single town, or I guess this is more true of the Greeks necessarily. I think the Romans had a little bit more sort of centralized role of their religion, but it's still very fragmented, where every town can kind of set up their own idea of what it means to worship this particular god or goddess, or they have a god or goddess of that particular village that is the most important to them. And it's just so splintered and fragmented that anybody can do whatever they want, essentially, and come up with their own stories and make their own traditions, make their own rituals. And this is really the first time you see this, apart from Judaism, where you see this very structured, regimented, this is how it has to be. And it's done in a way that is very different from Judaism, but is still very much carrying on that same tradition.
True. Good points. So the administration, of course, the headquarters, where you think it would be in Jerusalem, or somewhere in the greater Israeli area at the time, because that's where they started. But it really was Rome, and that's mainly because of two guys, Peter and Paul.
Yep.
And mainly because they got killed there, and Peter being crucified, presumably upside down, because the story was that he wasn't worthy to suffer crucifixion in the same manner as Jesus. And I think wasn't Paul beheaded?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Paul was beheaded,
but he was taken to Rome, and that it makes sense though, because that was the administrative center of the entire empire. Mm-hmm. So it was really like a transit hub too. Mm-hmm. It makes sense that you would focus your leadership there as long as it's safe. But if you're really trying to get messages out and trying to, and of course there's a lot of people there too. So Rome had an early on had a focus as the foundation or the location of the Catholic Church. So let's see. It goes into not a whole lot of detail about the different factions of popes and anti-popes, without getting into too much detail of it. I don't know if you want to talk about any of that stuff, but just talking about over time, the Bishop of Rome had several titles, which the Vicar of Christ was by far the most important. Mm-hmm. But the term Pope comes from the colloquial word for father, Papa, And so like basically the father of the church, which makes sense that Peter was, the Papa is the father of the church, the rock on which the church was built, at really Jesus' instruction. And since he was there in Rome and then got killed in Rome, I guess it just was a natural follow from there. But there's a lot of divisions with the early Catholic Church about the degree of rigor or compliance with certain thoughts or ascetics, I guess you'd say. How are you supposed to be acting? And I thought there was interesting. Who was it? Who was it a discussion with? Hippolytus, and he attacked Pope Saint Zephyrinus. This is the era of 200 AD, I guess. Well, that's Saint Zephyrinus was 199 to 217. He said he was corrupt, and that he Hippolytus himself proclaimed Pope by a dissident group, thereby becoming the first anti-pope. Eventually, however, he reconciled with Pope Saint Pacian, and the two were martyred together. So I was like, oh, okay. Well, so they got together, and the Roman authorities killed them both.
Yeah.
So there's a discussion about the worthiness of the members, and there's splits over whether or not the people who are soldiers or have committed certain sins could be redeemed, and the ultimate authority of ordained officers of the church. I guess we'll start with there because I'm kind of skipping ahead. But
sure,
bishops in the early centuries were elected locally, but they had to be ratified by the whole community as the will of the Spirit. So like they could be nominated early on. Yeah, and I think they had to be ratified by one of the church leaders, like the apostles and their successors. And then they have, minor orders. And there's a description by the mid-3rd century, the Church of Rome had grown to about 16,000 people, even when they're persecuted. And so they had, different orders of priests in different groups, and then of course deacons, which seemed like deacons were more prominent then than they are now.
Yeah.
Although I think they're trying to bring them back because deacons can be married, and so you can get more people to be deacons. And I think it's not as long of a period of study. So maybe we might be seeing the Catholic Church really pushing out deacons to doing more ceremonial duties. But
I want to touch on the bishop point too before we move too far ahead. Sure. I think one of the other important points you mentioned, by election, then also sort of ratified by the bishops, which is true, but it's chiefly done through the laying on of hands by other bishops. So it's not just that we the people sort of elect a new bishop to represent us, but it's also we are physically passing on this tradition, this authority that was given first to Saint Peter. We're passing it now on through to you through the laying on of hands. And, as far as I know, that tradition has never been broken in the popes and then into the bishops and then also into us, during confirmation, part of the process of becoming, fully initiated. That is still 100% same, kept through as a solid line.
Yep. Good points. And then, they don't talk about it too much, or the author doesn't talk about too much about the early believers probably believing that Jesus was going to come back right away, because that's what it sounded like. And there's a certain amount of disappointment when the time goes on. It's like, hey, when is this going to happen? Is it going to happen in my lifetime? And that's really kind of when they started realizing, this might be a long-term thing. And that's when the hierarchy became more and more important in that tradition and enforcing the tradition. So that does pass down from one generation to the next, because you don't know, is it going to be 1,000 years? Is it going to be 2,000 years? And now we're past that. So there was a Montanist heresy that is discussed briefly in the book, that rejected hierarchy as an obstacle to pure inspiration and located authority in prophets and prophetesses, dreams and visions, anticipating the imminent second coming of Christ. Well, we know they're all a bunch of BS artists. They believe that.
Well, it sounds a little bit more like, what you see a lot of the time now from some of the Protestant faiths, the more, charismatic, not necessarily that they're predicting, 100% when Jesus is going to come, although there are still a lot of people who do, try and make those predictions. Yeah. But in the idea that, the church hierarchy is an obstacle. the faith is something very deeply, individual, very deeply personal. However you want to do it is sort of, your own way, this sort of introspective rather than, sort of communal thing of, there is sort of, designated structure to, the mass and things like that. So I think, that's something that hasn't gone away, over the 2,000 years of church history, this, sort of rejection of the hierarchy.
There's in defense of that theory, there's a lot of logic behind it. Why do we need this structure? Why do we need all these rules? If I'm one of God's children, well, why do I need to have this and that? But I think I'm coming around more to the theory that leads you down a path of you are defining who God is, as opposed to really trying to be in communion with God, because it always ends up being on that person's terms.
Yeah.
Well, why do I have to go to church on Sunday morning? Why can't I just go for a walk in the park when it's pretty outside?
Yeah.
Well, okay. Yeah. It certainly is. Maybe you are a better deep thinker in a nice spring morning in the woods. But maybe you're just doing that because it's nicer. It's more pleasant. Maybe that's not really getting you closer to God. And I think a lot of people who question the hierarchy of the rules really just want to have their own rules, and they just want to define God the way on their own terms, which I get. And I mean, it makes a certain amount of sense, but I think it's a dangerous path, I guess, is what I would say.
Yeah. Well, I was talking about this with a friend up here, actually, whose parents were sort of raised Catholic, but she herself, wasn't necessarily, like, she was baptized, but never was really raised, very Christian. And so we have a couple very ardent Catholics in the office. And so we've been like influencing her, we've been trying to get her to be like, oh, you got to become Catholic, things like that. And her whole point was essentially like, well, how do you know that you're correct? It seems so arbitrary to me for not having, lived through this and stuff like that. You're just sort of, you have these very ritualized things, these very, regimented processes. How do you know any of that's correct if that's what you've been doing day in and day out? It seems more likely to me that the more individualist approach is better, because that doesn't, confine you to one thing. And essentially, the way that I think about it is that, I don't know better than 2,000 years of philosophers and theologians, essentially.
Yeah.
Is that, because we've done some reading on this, there is a reason for everything that we do within the Catholic Church that's been backed up by, again, 2,000 years of philosophy and church thinking. And so that's where I'm kind of coming at, from this point of view is, well, there is an answer. I might not know it personally, but I know that it has been answered and argued many, many times over history.
Yeah. And there's a certain amount of humility in reciting the liturgy and not choosing your own path and your own words. But I understand the logic of this friend of yours.
It's not a crazy thought, not by any means.
Makes a lot of sense, and it's something that I think everybody struggles with. It's okay. Do I really need to say this prayer again?
Yeah.
And then if you say the rosary, it's that to the 100th degree. So I don't have to say all the 10 Hail Marys in a row. But if you do it, it's like you start contemplating it a little more.
Exactly.
There's a certain psychological element of repetitive prayer that isn't just it is spiritual, but it's also psychological. There's something to it. And I don't know what that is, or maybe it's just something humans need, but there's some power to it. And also, if you're going to belong to a religion, everybody should be saying the same prayers.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're not in the same religion. You're just a group of people.
Well, to go back to what Tolkien said about this too, because he's quickly becoming my favorite theologian, apparently. But his point about it's the well-trodden path that so many saints and so many other great people before me have used these same things to go on to holiness. That recognition. Okay, well, it's worked for so many people in the past. It's that comforting path that so many have traveled, and that will lead me hopefully in their same footsteps.
Yeah. So then there's a discussion of the liturgy, which it really is similar to what we do today, and strikingly similar. Where it's the Eucharist was considered simultaneously a memory of Jesus's action, a thanksgiving, and an oblation or offering, in which he himself, the sacrificial victim, the only offering worthy to be made to the Father. That is what our liturgy is today. And they were doing this, AD 150, AD 100. It's pretty, it's reassuring in a way. That's like, okay, we didn't just come up with this. And I skipped over it earlier, but there was a discussion about, they had a real theory that they of tradition, and the worst thing you can be called is somebody that had a novel theory about theology. Because if you had a novel theory, you're probably a fool. But if it's a reinterpretation or a renewed thought of something that already existed, okay, maybe. But if you just have this a completely new or novel idea, you're probably a heretic in their view. And now today's day and age,
also somewhat Austin Freeman's view, as he sort of mentioned in our interview with him, that if you're just saying, I've discovered something new about the Old Testament, you're probably wrong or crazy.
Right. You're just making stuff up.
Yeah.
That's right. And but now, today's day and age, it's like everybody has to have a brilliant new thought. And, most of us just aren't that smart.
Yeah.
Creative,
That's
for us to come up with a new idea. And that's part of the reason why I kind of gave up on philosophy as a field of study, because it's like, well, I have nothing new to offer this. But then also I had the countervailing thought was, I could bet you I could create a religion.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you should sell yourself short, because I think you have very unique thoughts on a lot of different things that I don't think anybody has really thought of before. So maybe philosophy is still in your cards.
I've heard that a lot over my life, and I don't know what other people think. The things I say just seem to be obvious. Why wouldn't you ask if there's carpet in the afterlife? What else are you going to stand on? Are you going to be cold? Is it hardwood? Is it stone or concrete? I
don't think anybody has ever took the time to ask such a ridiculous question.
But, you say ridiculous, but it's fundamental.
I guess so.
It is the question. Is there going to be stuff? What is the world going to be? It is an example, but it's a concrete example. And so it's, I don't know. It's both brilliant and stupid at the same time. Yes. The best thoughts that I have are where you can't tell if it's absurd or brilliant.
There you go. That is our quote. That is 100% our quote for the next T-shirt or whatever we design. My best thoughts are when you can't tell if it's either absurd or brilliant. There we go. Mark Bishop.
Don't you think that's true of a lot of things, though?
Oh no, absolutely.
Like when you one of the people that I think is becoming one of the more prominent contemporary philosophers is Elon Musk.
Yeah,
because he has the same kind of, I'm not equating myself with Elon Musk, but he has a similar kind of attitude about how he expresses himself, where that it's that boundary between absurd and brilliant. Just not, he's very much more accomplished, of course. I'm talking about when he says stuff.
Yeah.
His humor, or when he approaches explaining things. I think that's true of a lot of really good people that comment on the passing scene, so to speak. All right.
I think a similar argument can be made for Donald Trump at times, and that he really borders the line between absurd and brilliant. More often, I think absurd, but every once in a while he has something that's like, yeah, why aren't we doing that? Why haven't we had that idea, in politics for before this,
Well, he has an interesting, he has a knowledge base that everybody underappreciates, including myself. Because somebody will mention some topic and he'll say, oh yeah, what about blank? I didn't even know about that. And you look into it, and he's right. That blank disproves the point, that this person was making, because he's just been around the centers of power and these corrupt people so for so long that he's kind of a savant in some ways. It is so frustrating because there's a potential there. He's all potential. He's no actual. That's all he is. He's a politician. He's all potential. He doesn't actually get the stuff done that has to get done to fulfill the potential.
Yeah.
Mainly because he just is the worst judge of character in the world as far as subordinates. I mean, who's this guy? He is like an HR director.
Yeah. No kidding.
You know, and I don't want to go too far into politics, but I'm fascinated by, you know, he is somebody that you should not look to for any moral authority to anything.
No, absolutely not.
Considering his life and his lifestyle and his choices, but he does speak the truth a lot of times about God and about morality. Mm-hmm. Sometimes maybe a sinner is the best person to go to for advice on that's kind of like the old Cary Grant movie, To Catch a Thief. The best way to catch a thief is to hire a thief to catch him.
Yeah. To kind of elaborate on that just very briefly, I've been reading a book, kind of connected with my internship by Walter Russell Mead about the four, foreign policy approaches, which also, sort of overlap in domestic policy. And just to briefly kind of say, you have like the Hamiltonians, very concerned with like money, monetary policy. We have to make sure we have good trade with other countries. That was sort of, the chief, Republican position for a long time, post Cold War, into the 2000s. The Wilsonians, who are very much, we have to spread, American ideals, to spread democracy to the world. You have the Jeffersonians, who are like the libertarians, who are like, just no more government, essentially. And then you have the Jacksonians, which, don't really pop up as sort of an intellectual force, but as sort of, the will of the American people. And he kind of makes the argument that after long enough, if you sort of have, the other three groups that sort of dominate the discussion for long enough, you're going to have some sort of Jacksonian political figure who comes up and he just speaks whatever the people are feeling. And that's exactly what we had with Donald Trump, is he's like, well, here's what the people actually think about all your nonsense about sending money everywhere and, enforcing, American ideals to every corner of the world. Here's what the people of the United States really think. And that's sort of how he came to power so quickly.
Yeah. Well, was it Vic Davis Hansen? It was somebody who said, if you make it impossible, if you make it impossible to speak the truth in polite company, mm-hmm. you will get a very impolite person who will be speaking the truth, because the person who is not bound by your social mores is the only one that's going to speak the truth.
Yeah.
Because you're going to get that person, and that person is Donald Trump. And I think that he wasn't bound by any of these people when he's talking about immigration and the, like our foreign policy and how screwed up it is and how corrupt it is and all that. But it took somebody that was so on the outs with that society in Washington, D.C. to be able to say those things. But we'll see what goes forward. I'm becoming less and less optimistic about our near and far future, but we shall see what happens. Anyway, back to the real deal, the real presence of God, actual body of Christ in the Eucharist and all that. And that was, of course, one of the reasons why they were persecuted, is because some people had rumors that they were cannibals. But early on, immediately, they believed that the Eucharist was the actual body of Christ. And of course, the people of that time, their concept of a symbol was something that actually made present the thing that it symbolized. Mm-hmm. So there's some overlap in that for the early days philosophers. But it's important that even then, if they had any leftover Eucharist, that it would have to be consumed by the clergy, buried, or even burned. But they weren't discarded, and they were never eaten casually. Mm-hmm. And I remember a buddy of mine, when I was an altar boy. I was shocked one time because we had the I don't know if you ever seen or maybe it was different when you were an altar boy, but the Eucharist wafers came in a plastic bag that was in a box. I mean, it was shipped in a box. It was a huge sack of Eucharist. And I remember we're waiting for the priest to come over. This buddy of mine, I'll leave his name out of it, grabs a handful of them and starts popping them like chips. Oh, what are you doing? It's like, it's just pieces of bread now.
Yeah, it's true.
It was kind of shocking to see it, but it's true. If it, you know, in that wafer form before it's blessed, it's just. But the point is, I'm trying to get a long way around. As even back then, they treated the same way we treat it today.
Yeah.
Again, that's reassuring to me that this tradition dates back to the early church, and we're not trying to recreate the wheel as far as the philosophy of the Eucharist and all that.
True.
And there, you know, that they also a lot of times emphasized regular prayer, daily prayers. You know, let's see, just there's a discussion about church buildings. Of course, originally they're just using whatever venue is available, but then as you know, of course, they were being persecuted, so they had to do it, you know, surreptitiously. But eventually, the church buildings became considered holy places, just like I guess the synagogue and that sort of thing. But you know that the churches even today, you know, the church is certainly going to be in our area going to be selling off some of those properties, but I think they deconsecrate them.
Mm-hmm.
They do some sort of ceremony to them before they let them become like a, you know, residence or, you know, firehouse or whatever. I don't know. And then I thought there was a really neat discussion of images, because, you know, a lot of religions and some religions don't like to have paintings or statues and those kind of images. But early on, in the Christian and Catholic Church, because that's all it was Catholic, was of course the crucifix. They also had, you know, like a symbol of anchor for hope, which makes sense. If they were sailing people, the anchor would ground you in a storm. The bark of Peter, which I've never heard of, that would bring Christians safety into the harbor. The Good Shepherd, of course, is, you know, allusions to Jesus and his stories about the shepherd and the sacrificial lamb and the sign of the fish. So all those things would have been used. And then there's a discussion of, you know, beauty. I think it was that now, or is it later in there? They talk about beauty.
Before you move on to that, you know, little linguistics note, which I thought was really interesting, is that, you know, the symbol of the fish, you know, also sort of, you know, the fishers of men motif, you know, fish pop up again and again in the New Testament, but also because the Greek word for fish, ichthus, if you took the letters of each of that, you could use that to make sort of an acronym for Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. So sort of like the cross poem, essentially, where you make a word out of the first letters of other words, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. Have you ever heard this, where the same section about associating these different images with the Gospels? The ox for Luke, lion for Mark, the eagle for John. Ever hear that?
I did not hear that until reading this, and then I looked in the mass this morning, and of course those are associated, you know, up in the top of the cathedral that I go to. Those symbols are right next to the names and the pictures of all the four Gospels. And I was reading another book, The History of the Hobbit, great book about Tolkien's draft writings for The Hobbit, and that came up then. So it was like right after I read this, I saw that, and then I read that other passage there. So, you know, it is definitely a thing, and it's still seen today. And now that I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I guess that is true. I think back at old Bibles and everything.
Yes, interesting. I had not. If I had learned that, I had forgotten it. Okay, I already talked about. I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit. Let's see. So yeah, I already talked about the catechumens. How you became a Christian back in the day. You know, 3 years of study. You know, and that the catechumens couldn't stay for the gospel, which is actually true to this day. They told them to get out.
Yeah,
go pray among yourselves, you non-Catholics. And even then, baptism was conferred on Easter, which is what we still do to this day.
With you know, RCIA, you know, of course now we have it just, you know, infant baptism, but everybody new comes in at the Easter vigil.
Yeah, I'm talking about the converts.
Yes.
Catholics. The adults. The adult baptism is always at Easter. I mean, I guess they can do it at different days, but I think they almost always do it at Easter.
I think it's typically done at the Easter vigil.
Requirement. Yeah. And then then in the 3rd century, there's a little bit of a change there, or extrapolation. That's the confirmation, the laying of hands, and the calling down of the Holy Spirit on those that are baptized, which you alluded to earlier. then there's a long discussion of penance.
Just want to break in there at the Day of Confirmation, because he goes on to mention, it's separate in the West, but in the East it remained part of the baptismal ceremony, and that's still true between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic. The Roman Catholic, of course, we have a separate, sort of ceremony for that when you're sort of age, but in the Eastern Orthodox, baptism and confirmation are at the same time.
Well, it makes sense. It doesn't, it makes sense that you have to confirm it. I think it almost should be a little bit later in life. Because really, when we do it like 7th grade here in the States, 8th grade, it's a little early for you really to be making a true commitment. And I think it probably should be like junior year of high school, probably at the earliest, because what's the point of it otherwise? It's really just another ceremony, like First Communion and baptism. Because the kids, I mean, I'm not trying to devalue it, but I think it probably, and there's been a long discussion about infant baptism and First Communion for children and all that. Do they really understand what's going on? And I think they can understand to a certain degree. But if you're going to have a separate ceremony for the confirmation, maybe do it a little bit later. But
true,
of course, it's consistent with an much older view of the maturity date of children. The 7 years and 14 years, you're considered an adult at 14.
Yeah,
or at least a sentient, fully sentient adult at 14, circa 1,000 years ago, I guess. I don't know.
I guess.
I'm not just pulling that out of my hat. That's
really,
that's a real thing.
Yes, I'm sure we'll might learn about that later.
Yeah, like you were an infant until 7, where you had no responsibility for anything you did. No, you couldn't sin before 7. You can have some type of responsibility from 7 to 14, but after 14, you know enough that you need to confess those sins.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So there you go.
Well, thank you.
Google it.
I will.
Google it. All right, moving along. The penance issue, which was really, really a fascinating issue. Forgiveness of sins, and the was it Celsus, who wrote the most sustained pagan polemic against Christianity, accused Christians of promoting moral laxity through easy forgiveness. And that's one way of looking at it. If you can be forgiven for all your sins, doesn't that promote moral laxity or sins itself? If it's so easy to be forgiven. And there's some theory about that. And then there's, of course, it end up having a lot of discussions over, okay, can we forgive all sins through this process? Not that we're doing it, but through God's divine intervention. And there's a discussion about soldiers, civil servants, or teachers, whether they should be baptized. But I mean, granted, they're a little left wing, but come on. But they're
the real heroes.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
But the teachers were the ones that taught the pagan gods, so that's why they're listed in there.
Yes.
And so there's a long discussion, and they had to figure that out. I think they really figured out that if somebody's truly repentant and seeks forgiveness, it's God's forgiven all our sins. And then there was 8 basic sins that they believed at the time: gluttony, luxury, love of money, sadness, anger, acedia, if I'm pronouncing that right, vainglory, and pride. And of course, these are not the English words are not what they believe. But you know what? I thought that the acedia, we should bring that back as one of the deadly sins, which is which I've never even heard of before. A jaded world weariness or boredom. How many, if that was considered a mortal sin in American society, how many people would be condemned to hell?
I think like all of us, just
myself
about everybody
included. Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the biggest issues with the church and religion as a whole now, is people are just like, I don't want to, or I'm just, so lukewarm, to all of the matters of faith and religions, just, sort of, well, I just want to go about my day. Don't want to worry about anything, but, this world sucks, blah, 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 blah. I kind of agree with you. I think we should bring that back as a more serious sin.
Well, they also believe that sadness, which it would be akin to what we consider clinical depression, was considered sinful because it involved an element of despair. That's kind of it. That's probably a healthy way to look at it in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, because anybody who's been depressed from time to time, and of course I've had my periods of sadness. Um, I haven't even thought of it in that manner. That it's almost like a sin because you're allowing yourself to take despair when Jesus is near, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that they had full discussions of those early on. We're talking about their very early seeds of the Christian and Catholic Church. So then the church and the empire. By the year 300, this author estimates that there may have been as many as 40,000 Catholics in Rome, and of course, then there's all sorts of persecution of them. I like this quote: "The Jews prior to the rebellion in 70 were treated by the Romans in a special way because they were so tenacious in their religious fidelity. They're not required to do anything that violated their faith, and that's the way to do it. And you just make yourself ungovernable."
Yeah.
I won't mention recent events in American history because I'm trying not to talk about it. But there's a there's a discussion of the conflict of values between the Roman society and the Christians. There's a prosperity in Rome at the time that rendered them indolent and hedonistic, which caused the Christians to really stand out. Because the Christian teaching was that sexual activity is permissible only within marriage for the sake of procreation, was implicit condemnation of the rampant hedonism of Roman life. And even the discussion of abortion pops up, because I did not know this, that not only did Romans practice abortion, which I was aware of, but every father had the right to decide whether or not a newborn child would be allowed to live. And there are people that advocate for that now. And they think they're being brave or something, where really they're just hedonistic Roman-like people.
Yeah.
And, so icky.
Yeah.
Anyway, any thoughts on that, or should we move right along?
No, I like the point about abortion there, especially because that's become such a central thing, in the Catholic Church and among Christian political debate, and people like to dismiss that as oh, well, that's just your new religious teaching, blah blah blah, just because the church tells you to. No, we were saying this about the Romans too. And I think if we've been saying this for so long, there's got to be some truth to it. Otherwise, it would have changed our minds, if it kept existing in the world. But no, it's pretty clear from early on. Catholic Church very much opposes abortion and should.
Yes. So then, of course, what caused them probably most of the problems is that the expansion of the cult of the emperor worship, where the emperor was considered a king, and the Christians would not swear allegiance to that emperor as a god or a demigod, because that was against their religion. Only Christ is a king. And they could have gotten away with just a little incense offering to the gods of the state, and many of them, I mean, I'm sure a lot of them did, because I don't expect anyone to risk their life for their religious beliefs. I mean, I don't have that expectation. I think people that do are should be considered saints and martyrs and wonderful people for the strength that they showed, especially when it was so simple to comply. But all you have to do is light a little incense and say a little bullshit prayer, and you go about your daily life. And the fact that those people in the early church didn't, man, they had balls.
Well, I think that's still a thing that comes about today. Especially with sort of, kind of getting political a little bit again, but especially in terms of, the differences in values between the right and the left, where, it's, especially with all the gender stuff, to those on the left who are like, well, it's just a matter of respect, just use their preferred pronouns. Whereas for people on the right, and generally more religious people, it's, no, you are asking me to refute the very way that I view the world. And believing that this is true. It's to them, it's, it's nothing, but to the other side, it's, well, no, that's the entire worldview. That's the whole point. I'm not going to buy into this, even if it is just saying, a certain word necessarily.
Right. And the counter argument to these jackasses is, well, if it's just a word, why can't I call you it? Or why can't I call you he or she? Because that's what I want to do. But why do you get to tell me that the rules have changed. And why can't you just tolerate me calling you a freak weirdo? How about that? How about that, jackass? I'm at the point where I am, and this leads into the next section, that at the time monotheism was considered intolerant, which I like. That was in quotes in the book, and that's how mainstream Christianity is viewed now. Is that, oh, we're intolerant, we're judgmental. Well, they're more judgmental than we are. You know, we're judgmental. In fact, all we're saying is, hey, what you're doing is a sin, but God can forgive you. You know, maybe you should think about not doing it anymore. But they're over there. We want to kill you, Nazi fascist bastards. What? I just told you to stop killing your own children, man. Maybe you should stop doing that. Ah, fascist. Yeah. So anyway, so and there's so many parallels. It's scary how many parallels are to the Roman Empire and how it collapsed upon itself. And if you read anything about the Roman history of the Roman Empire in the latter days of it, there was so much corruption, and foreign powers were able to bribe the leaders to gain influence and power within the Roman government. And you know, I mean, I think that's been going on for years and years, and it's not just the local, the most recent headlines about Biden. I think it was going on with the Clintons. There were allegations at the time going about the Bushes and the House of Saud, you know, giving all sorts of money to their business interests. I don't know if there's as much truth to that, but you know what? If the other guys are so corrupt, why can't the Bushes be corrupt? I don't know. But anyway, but you see this hedonism, and before the fall, and it's kind of human nature. I don't know. But anyway, so it's kind of funny to reading this about the early Christian church and what they're struggling against, and it's like similar to what the Catholic Church is struggling against today. It's just a different empire, the failing empire of the United States. It's just self-emulating. What's the word I'm looking for? Where you kill yourself, like Harry Carey.
I don't know. Immolating. It's self-immolating. Yes.
Self-immolating. All right. Yeah. I said it right.
There you go.
All right. And so the Christians obviously had a disrespect for these old gods, but it wasn't really meaning to be disrespectful just by implication. You know, there is only one God, and it's the God and Jesus and all that stuff. And we don't mean to harm your God, but you have your club, and leave us alone. No, go to the pits. We're going to tear you apart with lions.
That's a good summary.
Pretty much. And then, you know, this side is like, you know, so then there was a discussion of, okay, wait a second, you know, it's great to be a martyr, but to what extent should people be agreeing to be martyrs? And there's a funny story here, funny to me now, but when a group of Christians presented themselves to a Roman magistrate and demanded punishment, he remarked dryly that there were cliffs and rivers available to those who wished to commit suicide. I can just see that. There's, you know, like a Roman official saying, you know, God, these more Christians here will be martyred. What are we going to do with these people? They, you know, here they come again. Oh, we don't believe in your gods.
It's like a scene from Life of Brian.
Yeah, you need to martyr us. Oh, man, you don't want to commit suicide, go to the cliffs. There's a river down there. Jump in the river. There's a really strong current. Then put some weights on. Yeah. Get out of my office. I got places to invade and stuff. I don't know. I got to go to the bathhouse. Get out of my office. I don't know. I'm not martyring you today. Martyr yourself. Can you just see that happen?
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, don't you think? And that's pretty much, he's like, oh, jeez. Anyway, but then there's other martyrs who, you know, that they believe what they're going to believe, like the story of St. Lawrence. They're burning him like in a pit, like a pig being roasted. And he reportedly jokes, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." That's a badass dude.
St. Lawrence is the patron saint of cooks because of that.
Oh, very good. I think that's gross. Okay. Yeah. It all. Yes. That is really weird. Okay. So there's a long discussion of the persecution and, you know, always pronounce these wrong. Domitian, Commodus and Marcus Aurelius. Now Marcus Aurelius, you know, with his meditations, he's that guy, right?
Yes.
Very, very thoughtful guy. Of course, there's a discussion of Trajan, one of the good five emperors. But these people, they didn't like the Christians. But Marcus Aurelius despised them for not fully supporting the empire and ordered persecution that was particularly severe in Gaul, which is in France. And then paradoxically, his debauched and sadistic son Commodus proved to be more tolerant. It's kind of like, that's kind of weird. The Diocletian really wanted to exterminate him. So and I think wasn't he the one that was the Book of Revelations was kind of referencing how
that was Nero. So Nero was like pretty soon after.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Nero was pretty soon after Jesus's death. So this is what had been when like John was presumably writing this. And so he's actually mentioned on the page before as, what does it say here? He says, under Nero, 54 to 68, Christians were coated with tar and set on fire in the amphitheater to light the night games. And over the next 2 centuries, numerous Christians were sent into the arena to be torn apart by wild beasts. So it says particularly severe under him.
It was Domitian, whom even pagans counted among the wicked, initiated a persecution that inspired the image of the great beast in Revelation.
Oh, I apologize. But I think, Nero's like
Nero's before him, right?
The Antichrist. Image in Revelations. Yeah, sorry.
You should be.
I
am. So thousands were martyred under Diocletian. But the famous boast arose during that time: the blood of martyrs is the seed of Christians. And I could see how it would be inspiring to the mob. At first, it's like, oh, let's get these crazy kooks, but you could see how the crowd of people would be like, wait a second, these people are coming in here peacefully and they're getting murdered one after the other, and they're still saying they believe in that weirdo religion. I gotta find out what's going on there. You could see how it would just take off like a firestorm, which is just so human and also so bizarre. Anyway, so there's the apostasy issues with the priests that may have complied too much, but I understand that kind of stuff, and it's hard to be brave under those extreme circumstances, and I don't know that and then for those people that did, can they get forgiveness later? And there was Cyprian in Egypt, I think, wasn't it? Cyprian,
Carthage. So not Egypt necessarily.
Yeah, sorry, but he had like a secret. He went into hiding and still kind of administered the church there. He's a bishop, and so the question was, well, should he have just brought himself forward and be a martyr? And he said, well, I'm trying to fulfill the mission in the way I can, and somebody's got to be in charge of this group. Which I mean, I understand that argument. Of course, he was eventually beheaded, so he got there eventually.
Yeah, that's a shame.
So I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about how the church grew through that area.
I do want to mention, sort of in this last section, we talk about rigorism. A schism occurred in Egypt under a bishop named Meletius, and elsewhere in North Africa under a bishop named Donatus, both of whom held that those who lapsed under persecution could never be received back into the church. Both schisms endured for centuries. The schism of Donatus is particularly important because that's where St. Augustine comes in a few years after that, around the 400s, because that was his chief opponent, and how he really rose to prominence as a theologian because he was arguing against the Donatists, who believed that if you leave the church you can never come back. And so his whole thing is the forgiveness of God, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the next section. He also mentions at the end, sort of just history-wise, Diocletian's reign marks the last successful effort to maintain the empire intact, divided the imperial power, setting up a tetrarchy of 4 men, each of whom had responsibility for part of the empire. And then civil war broke out, of course, after his death, as they all sort of vied for power. That's sort of where we leave off history-wise going into the next chapter.
Yes.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about this chapter? What are you thinking overall?
I'm getting used to the format because I was expecting more of a narrative, but it is easier to read in a sense because it's like so segmented. Like each page will have, 3 or 4, maybe sometimes 5 little separate, paragraphs, but it has a separate title on it. So it's easy to organize my thoughts.
I like it because I think it gives us the opportunity to sort of make our own narrative out of it, sort of weaving in the disparate parts and making it into one big overlining picture that we can look at for the whole chapter. So I like the format. I do like it.
Yes. Yeah. It's different.
Yes. But I enjoyed the chapter. Thought it was great, very informative. Lots of things I didn't know, but overall very reassuring that lots of the parts of the modern church were there from the very beginning.
Yeah, because I don't have a whole lot of faith in our current leadership. If they came up with this last week, I'd be like, oops, wait, what?
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding.
Maybe I should go back to the first century.
Yeah, there you go.
Do what they were saying. Well, they were saying the same thing we're saying.
Yeah, that's true.
But not true. English.
Yes, presumably not in English. English didn't exist yet for another like 200 years.
Yep.
Made in the 400s when Hengist and Horsa, the twin kings of the Jutes, invaded the island that later became England. Just a little bit of trivia for you there.
Too much. A little bit.
All right. Well, I guess we should wind down this episode then with that fun little linguistic information. Any other closing thoughts from you?
No.
All right. Well, this has been season 6, episode 3 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
Still Mark Bishop.
Are you sure you don't want to learn more about Hengist and Horsa, the twin kings of the Jutes?
That sounds like a cartoon.
I should make that. It'll be the hit new cartoon among kids who want to learn about 400 Germanic history.
I got to tell you, there's a whole market of material that people would love to see for their children that isn't offensive. So if you can come up with a children's story based upon Hengist and Hortus and the king of the Jutes, you could be a millionaire.
That's true. I'll work on that. I'll come with an idea for next episode. That's true.
Children's programming. They need writers. They need talented writers. Do it.
That is true. All right. We'll see about that.